Okay. Thank you everybody for attending. Sorry about the delay there. This presentation is called What's the Big Deal About CQCs, which is actually by me and Pat Theeke. Where's the, do we have like a remote or?
Nah, yeah. Really, I can just,
he's the remote.
Okay, I'm the remote. Okay.
Steve can help.
First, let me just go ahead and give a general overview of exactly what we were talking about with CQCs. They're also called CW.
Well, the CWEs are related.
The CWEs that you heard in the presentation yesterday and also at the technical workshop last week are basically related to the CQCs that we're discussing here. Why have them? Well, the question comes up, what does your project care about? What are the things that are important for your project to look for when doing static code analysis?
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I can't see the charts.
I'm working on loading those on the share. So
Okay.
We're just going to keep going.
They're mostly talking points anyway, so...
Yeah, well, I'm just going to discuss, and once that's up, then we can synchronize it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. The whole point was, again, to make sure that projects were looking at things that they care about when doing static code analysis instead of just picking a tool and running with it. As you've seen in the previous discussion that we had with Jake Cox, there's some differences between the tools. And there's even more tools that we have available: Code Sonar, Polyspace. There's even a code checker. There's one code checker or CPP checker. There's one that's actually a part of Understand. So that we have all kinds of different options that we could use. But where do we get these inputs from? An example source may be the golden rules that we have as part of our project. So it's not something as a whole that we all have to agree on per project that we use the same ones. For example, James Webb. We have a golden rule that says we do not fly dead code. So for us, dead code may be more important than another project that doesn't have to necessarily worry about those kind of issues. Ultimately, these CQCs will be used as inputs to the static code analysis method. Next slide. So Pat and I wrote a method that basically takes inputs or CQCs, also the tools that you intend on trying to use with the CQCs. So you would already know which tools are capable of performing analysis and what your CQCs are, and come out of the method with your analyzed results. During the process, you would use those CQCs to determine which tools you want to use. And again, it was created with the evidence-based assurance effort in mind. The inputs, again, CQCs, you determine which tools you care about. We good?
Yeah.
All right.
Those are the advanced. Yeah.
Okay. And the last thing on this slide says that the output of the method is the analysis results from the tool selected, which we just said. Now the next piece of this is determining which tools need to be used. Whenever you're determining what you care about, you need to look at the tools, figure out what they detect, and determine which tools you essentially need to use, which best find CQCs that you're looking for. So again, what does a project want to look for, and which tools can help you provide that coverage? I don't think we need, go ahead and go to the next slide there. Just seeing if there's anything else on here.
Can I back up one quick second?
Sure.
With respect to the method that Rick referenced, really what we did is we took the existing method, nothing wrong with the way it was written per se, and it just sort of stood the beginnings on its head. What we had was a method that allowed us to choose from one or more static code analysis tools to do automated static code analysis. And that was perfectly fine. But we sort of ran into a problem where we didn't understand exactly what we were getting from the tools. Trying to understand what checkers existed, and this goes back to something that came up in Jake's talk, but also what aspects of the software actually interfered with the results that we got from the tools, and that was from a real example that we ran where we had auto-generated code from a modeling tool, but also the particular design of the software being completely event-driven masked some of the defects that might otherwise have been identified by the tool. So as a result of those two things together, we weren't getting what we thought we were getting. And not knowing that up front was somewhat perilous to our assurance statements that we wanted to make.
Well,
We weren't sure what we'd be able to say about it. And so we said, well, we should at least have some idea going in what we want to see and what we're interested in seeing, and go into the method with the full knowledge of what we were interested in, as opposed to seeing what the tool would give us on the back end. So just that cognition up front of what we were actually most interested in and what we absolutely needed to be able to assure was why we really just tweaked this method to turn that around.
and specifically, an example would be Clockwork does not do divide by zeros.
Anymore.
Well, it actually never
It
did.
never did.
Never
Turns out.
did. So if you want
If you will.
any kind of divide by zero functionality, or find those kind of checks, then you're going to have to run FlexiLint or another tool that supports it. In addition, one thing that used to be in Clockwork, Inspect in particular, was unused functions. It used to be able to tell you it had an unused .func was the error message, actually gave you those. Well, as a part of their newer version, what they did is they pushed that functionality out to one of their other tools. And so it's no longer in the analysis report when you're running Inspect. So you never see unused functions anymore. They want you to use a separate tool to try to determine that kind of stuff.
Fine, a separate tool. So that's
Well,
Clockwork.
Yeah, well, we do. We may have support for that tool, but yeah, you're right. It's essentially, hey, you buy this piece of tool if you want this
For an
functionality.
added price.
Right, and it wasn't mentioned in their analysis or their build logs whenever they
It
were.
wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't something that they even submitted to us in their release notes. So, this is a good reason to do that kind of analysis.
To think about up front what you want and then choose your tools accordingly. So had we known, for example, that unused functions were no longer flagged in Clockwork, but that was something we were interested in, which it is in our particular case, and I think in many cases, we may have made a different tool choice. Or whether we found it used an additional tool, or whether we made a whole new choice to begin with. We would have done that from an informed point of view.
Well, yeah, that's another option too.
But that requires planning and knowing upfront.
Yeah.
The divide by zero, what about divide by null?
It's the same thing. It doesn't know how to do that. Right. Yeah.
I guess just a little chime in here, and I have no visual, no share. I'm just following your audio, and I do not have in front of me. But planning on the front end is a very good idea, and you might just want to have like a little check sheet of questions in terms of asking what you're looking for, and then go through the check sheet and then lead down to a particular tool.
Well, yeah, and that's important. And actually, the point of this discussion is to kind of talk to possibly some of the places that we could go to try to find those CQCs, or start to generate a list or a superset of, CQCs or locations where we can find them, so that projects know at least where to start hunting for these things.
Or to prioritize in the case of either limited resources or if I've got to run 5 tools to get a certain amount of coverage and I don't have the time or the tools for that matter to do it, and I have to start making decisions, again, make informed decisions, knowing up front what it is you're interested in and what it is you really need to focus on. So it is all about planning up front. I agree 100%, and that was another real impetus for looking at the whole method in this way.
All right, so with that, are we ready to... Any questions about anything so far that we've discussed? Either in the room or over the phone?
Can you see things online yet?
Not according to the last person who spoke.
Well,
It's just,
okay.
it's a little difficult. I don't have the tools in front of me. I don't have the visual. I don't have the share. I only have
Okay.
the audio. I see the direction you're going in. I think we all agree about the planning up front, going through a check sheet. I'm not sure your organizational structure is another thing that you're going to go to get that.
Actually, I have a question. Do you have access to Adobe Connect, or is it one of those?
Yeah, I'm on Adobe Connect, but
Okay.
I'm an external person.
Okay,
so
well,
I'm not
you should still be able.
employee or a NASA contractor or official.
That's fine. You should still be able to see this. It's through the breakout discussion.
Is it a different?
Yeah, it's a separate site. It's not the IV&V workshop. You know how you put in the Adobe extension or Adobe Connect and then the IVV_workshop? Well, instead of that, it's, what is it?
It's IVV dash workshop breakout.
Workshop.
So with the information that we've just talked about, I think we're ready to start starting to comprise a list of artifacts and CQCs themselves that might be important to everybody here.
Well, talk a little bit, Rick, about what you've done already with respect to that, starting with the tools in this case.
Okay, so what we've done so far in regards to the answers to these questions is we've started creating a capabilities matrix to say, first of all, what do the tools provide us? Because that's the first question we need to answer is exactly what are we getting from our tools? So we've been working with SWAT to try to figure out which tools are not only providing certain things, but also which tools are better at it, if that makes sense. So which one's the best tool for the job if you're looking for a specific thing. And then in addition to that, each project needs to determine if there's coverage gaps, how they want to handle those coverage gaps. Say there's something that no tool can provide. Then all of a sudden it's a question of whether or not you want to do manual analysis or whether or not it's worth the effort, or whether or not there's some other analysis you need to perform.
Or do targeted analysis in very specific places.
Right.
You're gonna have to expend the effort in order to accomplish the goals you have in mind. And then try to do it.
Oh, sorry.
So some of the things you just said, though, is part of that effort going to be, us as a facility and a program making some determination as to the quality of the different checkers and the different tools? Because obviously they all say they have great checkers. Okay, but we do a lot of stack analysis, probably more than most organizations, I venture to say, ever do.
That's a great question, Jared. And actually, if you don't mind, okay, so we're talking about.
Pay me if that leads right into
That's fine. So, the first thing I just want to mention real quick before we get into that was our next steps again was creating a capabilities matrix, which we're working with SWAT to do, which gives you a list of tools and what things they find, and then an add-on to our current method to say for the CQCs that can't be covered again, we need to, or as a project, you may need to consider, how to fill in those gaps. And then the next slide talks about a proposed CD effort that we came across, which says that as part of the CD effort, they would create a capabilities matrix to show, again, which CQCs are covered and not covered. Because, tools love to tell you what's covered. They're never going to tell you what's not.
They didn't even tell us when they took something away.
Exactly.
They
So,
promote that.
yeah, again, what you would have to do here is create a set of validation programs or scripts, kind of like what the technical discussion just talked about last week.
Yeah,
with
what was the
security.
name of that? Karina, the
The
name of the, what was the name of it?
Juliet.
That's right. I do
So-
start with a J.
Exactly like what Juliet had done, but more on a not just security related, but pretty much everything that we care about, everything that the tools can provide. First of all, assure what the limitations and the capabilities are. Verify that new tools and new versions of existing tools are not limited or haven't pulled anything out. And then, of course, identifying different tools or methods when they need to be required. And also checking to see whenever existing tools no longer meet our needs and are no longer warranted. If there's something that across the board would just,
Not
there's,
enough people are
yeah.
using.
And let's say, for example, we're paying a lot of money for a license, and there's a tool out there that we're also paying for that across the board we know, at least meets or exceeds every single one of those CQCs in the same way. Then maybe we need to reevaluate whether or not we need to continue with that license.
One thing that we found, and you guys certainly have much more experience with this than we do, when it comes to quantification, is that coverages, when it's quantified, it can be coverage, they cover 30% of specific type of problem. The good thing about Julia, because it's a benchmark, is this is a specific vulnerability, but there is many different ways to implement buffer overflow.
Mhm.
So in some cases, there were as many as hundreds or thousands variants of the same problem. And buffer overflow, by that matter, is not only security.
Right. I mean, we look at it as well.
It would cover it, which would mean 30% of all they will find. The rest, 70% are missed. And based on the two discussions that we had from Jacob,
Yep.
he had very similar experiences on non-security related issues, which were very consistent. So I know you have much more experience than us, but the quantification and the fact that this is well organized, and you know that you have something there that the tool is supposed to find, so you can speak of false negatives as well.
Yes.
It really brings additional light that you cannot know on a real software. You never know if we know where the problems are. We wouldn't have trouble.
We wouldn't need the tools to run, right?
We wouldn't
So
even
yeah,
have
I just my 2 cents to
Okay.
the discussion.
No, actually,
Appreciate that.
the presentation that you two put together was very timely and very disappointing to me. I'll have to say.
Well, Chris,
I mean-
part of the ongoing disappointment. Maybe this one is going to do
Yeah,
that.
that's right. Well, I wasn't expecting 100% by any means, but I sure as heck was expected better than 0% in a lot of cases and fairly fundamental
Yeah.
So
problems.
the one thing we can
So-
do is we have a huge data set of all this software we run code on.
Yeah.
For example, some of the checkers in question, like you guys did some analysis on the hard-coded passwords and things like that, right? Obviously, it's not going to do great at that because that would be something that would be very tricky to program up. But we probably have examples that we can say, okay, maybe we can't say what they missed because that's obviously impossible to do, but we can say what they catch. We can pull out all the examples, somehow query the systems, pull out examples of what types of formatting do they set up that they do catch. Obviously, if it says password equals,
Yes.
catch it. You know,
Not necessarily.
right. But
Yeah.
Unless
that
we're
would be
looking
good
for that
to know is,
literal.
okay, it sucks at catching this, but in general, if it's done in this way, this is how it
Right. Exactly.
You know?
It's
So,
important to know that kind of
It's
stuff
important
too.
to know that because if it's an important topic that your project needs, you can know what the tool already verified, so you can manually look for other stuff.
Right.
It looks for password check. Okay, I don't have to do a search for that, but maybe I'll do PWD equals or whatever.
Right.
Yep. So really what we were talking about, and I should mention the CD effort that he alluded to, wasn't even proposed in this last cycle. We're still sort of drafting it up. But it was very much in line with what you folks did using Juliet. So we would be either finding, which would be ideal, or preparing an analog to Juliet, but for the more general case of the tools that we're interested in. And in particular, looking at things like the design, the way that the software was designed that I mentioned earlier. How do certain kinds of designs maybe impact the validity of the results by either masking true positives or generating false negatives? So those are of interest to us too, just from a limitation standpoint. Now, all that said, we kind of started with Rick talking about where we got an initial list from. So we did go through the existing tools that we had. We even looked at some free tools, right, in other languages.
Mm-hmm.
So we have. Why don't you talk about JS Hint and JS Lint a little bit?
So one of the efforts that we had on our project was to look at JavaScript and just see whether or not we could find a tool that actually worked with JavaScript. So we went out there. I went out there and found a way to use a JS Lint and JS Hint, basically a heuristic that was commonly accepted by people who look at static code analysis for JavaScript. And we created a couple bat files that actually used this heuristic and actually gave you results sort of the same way that you would expect in Clockwork, where it would give you like a CSV file that you could grasp and actually go through the results. And before that, though, we had nothing. And so we actually...
manual analysis.
Right, right. And so we were looking for a way to do this more efficiently. So we did create we created a tool that basically used those heuristics to give you results. And in addition, I mean, we've got, as you mentioned, we have other languages as well that are also giving us, problems. Or there's certain things that certain languages actually prevent against, so you don't need to check for. So CQCs could be different depending upon the actual application themselves as well.
And that was something I guess we expected. For example, in JavaScript, you can have a triple equal sign. It means something very specific to JavaScript. Whereas, of course, C has a single and a double. Java has a single, a double, and a triple. So there are certainly some of these kind of characteristics that are very unique to the language itself. But perhaps more interestingly than that is when you take that up a level of abstraction, there are certainly some that apply across multiple languages. Buffer overflows. I mean, you can have buffer overflows in any number of languages. So that becomes a more general kind of characteristic we want to look for, as opposed to the triple equal sign use in JavaScript. Yeah. And so they kind of go all over the map. I'm kind of curious. One, we can ask this group, but what other kinds of influences might there be to look at different types of these kind of checks versus more language specific or very high level conceptual kind of checks.
MPCV did an effort that looked at SWE 134 which is what I included in this. It has behavioral characteristics whose source was source code, structure or behavior. If they did checks in certain areas, and I liked that particular requirement in that standard, and it's a good way to it's a place to start in case you don't have anywhere to start from. So that's about it.
All right. Yeah, it was a good point, Darylyn. I was going to say also, so I know that we've got about 10 minutes left before the next discussion happens over in the other room. So I do want to go ahead and start trying to comprise a list of possible things that would contain CQCs. I can go ahead and already start that, and feel free to chime in whenever people have ideas. But
I will point out that the next session does start at noon, but the next breakout doesn't start until 1:30.
Right. So we could stay in here. It's not like anyone's going to kick us out.
Right.
But for those that want to attend to 1 o'clock, yeah. What I was going to say is, first off, we can look at. I know that coding standards is important. I've heard people say that. Obviously, we don't want to do QA on the particular project that we're looking at, but maybe a general coding standards like MISRA or something like that would be a potential place to go look for determining things that you care about. That's one potential.
What's MISRA?
MISRA is, I forget what it stands for, but it's just it's an accepted coding standard that's across, I don't know if it's affiliated with IEEE, but it is.
It started in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
It's like Motor Industry Software Reliability Association or some crazy thing like that. So.
Yeah. For those that didn't hear that, it was started with the auto industry. So it's been commonly accepted, or more commonly accepted, I should put it like that.
But even there, we have to be a little bit careful. There's guidelines that we had, for example, for the JavaScript coding on James Webb, and when you look at them, some of them make perfect sense. They're very good because they're really trying to be defensive. Even the use of these equals variants that I talked about, it's really trying to be somewhat defensive about what the software is going to do and limiting it by the language constructs. But others of them were a little crazy. Like where you put spaces and how you break, where to break lines, and some of these things that may be important from a maintainability standpoint, but from a functional standpoint aren't all that meaningful to us. So certainly using coding standards, whether they're generally accepted across some industry, like Israel, or whether they're very specific to a project, is a good source to look for.
So keep in mind, there's other checkers in there, like the band checkers, for example. That's all based on common good coding practices and stuff. But that doesn't mean that the software was developed against it.
Right.
That's
So
right.
we saw, for example, we looked through some of our results. They violated like so many of the band things. But does that mean, like when I look at that and see a huge number of errors for all the band type checkers, that tells me it's probably not appropriate to analyze and write issues against all this. And I'm talking like gross numbers, like tens of thousands of errors. Okay, so
Wow.
it's probably better just to talk to them about it and say, look, clearly you didn't develop for this standard. How do you want to handle this? What is appropriate, what's not appropriate? Maybe write a risk against the project, but you might waste a lot of effort looking into things like that when you see it's grouped and there's a conglomerate of it that clearly they didn't develop.
Well, and if you
Same with Black
but
by the way.
well, sure. But if you knew up front, for example, that there's a particular aspect of that you are interested in, and you look for that, then you would want to report against those, because the assurance you want to provide is this doesn't exist or this does exist.
Yeah, so that might be where you have a dialogue and say, look, we see tons of errors in this grouping of messages here. What's really important to you guys, what's not, because we really don't want to look at all those. Especially like our code is 1.5 million lines of code, kind of similar to that. So
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you have to pick and choose what you look at.
Right.
I mean,
You guys can run it all.
And is your standard coding practices for the vendor as a company culture, is there any discrepancies? Are they out of line with what is expected by their customers?
I don't think I'm not quite tracking.
For example, if these coding, let's say, styles or
Yeah.
practices, if that's not, if we're getting hundreds and hundreds of issues, results, but they're not out of line with any kind of requirements, then that's just a culture.
Well, that's right. And
So the overlap of what is expected by the customer requirements versus what is their standard practices versus Missouri.
Right, and again, I mean, I've been told from other individuals, we want to be careful not to do just QA for them. There's two separate roles that we're playing there. So if you start going too far down there, you might get into that role. But next thing I was going to mention real quick, obviously I've already had it in my slides, was the golden rules for your project. Those are applicable. You've also got, obviously what the tools can provide. If you have a list of those, you can look into more detail to see whether or not they're applicable for your project.
yeah, I mean, I'm going back, a few years here on IV&V, and there's been a significant amount of effort put into the folks who are really good and knowledgeable about these tools, of either tweaking things on the front end to avoid getting excessive output, but also filtering that excessive output on the back end to only get what you care about. And there's been a lot of effort, I think, put into that, and various attempts have been made over the years that have certainly made an impact on specific projects. But they were also still done sort of with the global idea in mind of these are the things everybody would be interested in getting rid of and not seeing, as opposed to up front saying, wait, which is it I don't care about, and let's get rid of those.
Right. And I think his idea, though, of getting this documented all in one place, maybe almost as like a Six Sigma or an engineering flow chart type of diagram, might be something very handy to have. And then this way the project can just pick it up and kind of step through the flow chart. But we have a backbone to start with.
Well, yeah, and so you're right. I mean, obviously, whenever we're generating this list, then it could be things that you look at and say, did you look at this? Did you look at that? Did you look at this? And just go step by step through them. I mean, granted, and you can write this down too, Darylyn. I mean, things like buffer overflow errors are important to us. I mean, we've known that, and people can talk about specific ones if they want as well. But
Well,
was also trying to
I
be-
think another good place to start too is to really look at the CWEs that are already defined by MITRE.
Yeah.
But though I was looking at those documents,
Zip
they're
codes.
somewhat old, right? I mean, the date on a lot of the CWE stuff that I saw on the website was 2011. So not that I expect any of those things are no longer relevant, but I fully expect there's new things that are probably relevant that aren't captured there. So that just kind of surprised me. Yes, us young bucks, it's 2 years ago, it seems like a long time.
CWE is very hard to work around because it's not visualized anywhere. And more importantly, it's a very complex hierarchical structure, so it's not free or anything. Any single CWE can have multiple parents and multiple children.
Right.
So
So
if you start removing that graph, you can end up from one side to a specific different side because we all know some bugs are overlapping in the sense it can be out of range and buffer overflow, but sometimes some out of range doesn't have to do anything with buffer overflow. So it's a tremendous stuff because of the complexity, and I don't know how good job they do about it, like keeping it up to date. But it's
Looks like a
really
semantic
hard.
analysis application too.
But you mean as far as how those are structured?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't delved into them even as much as you say that there's all these relationships. But certainly there's a lot of things that are categorized in the CWEs by MITRE that are generally applicable, like buffer overflows, like out of range access and whatnot. So that's another good source, I think.
Yes.
If we could mine that in some way to help identify the ones in particular that we are interested in, that would help us build a good master list.
This may be somewhat self-evident in terms of CQCs and how you would source them or come up with inputs to create them. Target system and domain that you're talking about clearly drives that significantly. In other words, if you've got an embedded piece of flight software, that the quality characteristics that are probably relevant to that are going to vary compared to a enterprise business system. So that's probably, from an abstraction at least, a very good thing to start with and drill down from there. And I know we've talked even in the static code working group, people, ground system versus flight software within the NASA IV&V domain, that's one very clear distinction. And we're starting to do more and more groundwork. So, and that drives your CQCs.
That's right. That's going to drive the selection of what you find
exactly.
most important or what maybe you really want to target. I mean, security is sort of a big deal across a lot of these, but certainly when you're talking about ground systems, there is a higher interest in the security aspects because you have more of a human user at all times. So, so yeah, that's an excellent point, and it really goes precisely to why we think we need to think about these up front and not sort of let us see what falls out of the back of the tool.
did you have a list of questions?
Well, I sort of just had a list of things to get people talking, but we haven't had that problem.
What are you saying?
Yeah, thanks to Jared.
Well, you know what? It might be a useful thing to post as a post-log thing for this discussion, your questions, in case we didn't cover them. And I can post that, and we can gather it after the fact.
I can send something.
Sounds
Just have it written down somewhere.
Thank you.
So,
And I remember MetLab, that there are some activities that are going on that we're working closer and closer with vendors.
Yeah, I could go ahead and share this with the folks who participated in this, but I had mentioned to Rick prior to the meeting that SWAT had a meeting this week with MathWorks vendor who they have the Polyspace tool, and they actually have a new tool capability which we should be getting within IV&V that within the next 6 weeks or so. Hopefully we'll get that all installed, and I think some training will even happen. But the key thing, though, to cut to the chase, I guess, is we had a discussion with them this week about the possibility of them collaborating some with SWAT and IV&V in turn, because we'd be working with you guys on the projects, for instance. But over the next fiscal year, they have within their kind of way they view the world, at least in terms of polyspace, software quality levels is I think the term they use, very similar. In other words, the target you're seeking. What do I care the most about, and have I achieved that level of quality or expectation? And I shared with them some of the code quality characteristics and this mindset the program's trying to take, and they were very interested to work back and forth with us. They even said that they would be willing to take our inputs and even revise their tools if it was appropriate to reflect some of our ideas on those kind of quality attributes or target levels. So that's kind of encouraging. I mean, MathWorks is a large vendor, and that could actually benefit some of this effort to have some back and forth input.
That could help us try to,
vendor like
I was going to say, that could really help us try to cover those coverage gaps that we come across.
Did you happen to mention to them that different kinds of software or software focused for different purposes may have different, and now I'm going to try to use your words using their words, different quality levels that you care about?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that, and along with probably market share, one of the reasons that
they're here to make money. That's fair.
One of the reasons they decided to split off and do another tool, because this, and I'm actually kind of excited as the SWAT team lead about this other tool. I think they're going to call it Bug Finder or something, but it's based on the same formal methods approach, but it doesn't require the complete mathematical formal, complete the loop and do the formal verification that could take however long and consume. They actually cut that off sooner by choice, much like the other tools do. I mean, Clockwork, its algorithms under the hood, it takes it to a certain point of data flow analysis.
So enough is enough, right?
And that's what this other one, so they recognize, again, for probably both market share reasons, and they've heard customers like us say, yeah, polyspace is awesome for certain targeted things, but it does come with a cost. That'd be really nice to have some of that same mathematical formal methods base, but yet not have to be as worried about the depth that requires. So I think they've heard that message, and that's why it could be interesting, that quality levels and the code characteristics, that discussion back and forth, especially when they're rolling out a new tool like that. I mean, I think both sides may benefit some from that. So I think that was a positive thing.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'd like to hear more about that when they roll that out. I need to step. I want to go to this next presentation, so I'm going to step out. I don't know if everybody else feels that way, but I want to.
Quick chime. This is Mary, and I'm off in pharmaceutical medical devices most of the time, but MathWorks does have a good reputation by our stuff. Just to throw that in there as well.
I'm sorry, which
when you're going looking at these larger guys, that might be somebody you want to talk to.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, hey,
we definitely need somebody driving this. I'm not quite sure. It was a little breakout, but we need somebody in the technical management role collecting all this and driving this and getting those flow charts together.
Yeah, and we're actually working with SWAT to start that.
Did you appoint? Because I know you have some SWAT guys too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you officially appointed somebody, but just taking a step back, unless you have somebody that's really going to be driving this.
We have two groups. So first of all, SWAT's been really involved in this, and we also have a group of people that do static code analysis here at the facility, and they're also in charge of actually handling this and helping trying to create this workflow. So
there's a momentum that's being gathered across at least our users and ourselves to make sure that this is going to become priority if it isn't already. So.
Right.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
All right, I think.
Okay, that is my thing, because unless you have somebody up in the front collecting and talking to the users, talking across the board, talking to the vendor, collecting the information, putting it in a format that people can access and understand, and making those simple flow charts for them to step through in the beginning of the project,
Yeah.
That's really, I think, kind of where you want to be in the beginning is identify that person and let them take the ball and kind of run with it.
Well, yeah, and you're definitely right. Well, I'll go ahead and conclude
Yeah,
this,
I
I
have one
think.
eyebrow. See, I'm lucky. I'm remote, so I have one eyebrow on the next presentation already running. So
Nice.
I don't want to hold everybody up. But
That's
what
fine.
she said.
I appreciate your information there, and yeah, I appreciate everybody for attending. I think that we've got at least somewhat of a started list of targeted areas to look at, and then we can use that to basically define a better master list from this. So I appreciate everybody attending, and again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to contact myself, Rick Hess, or even attend our static code working group meetings as well. And we'd appreciate your feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Just